The summer of '69 started on a sour note. Everyone was on the hustle, and petty crime had increased. Cleanliness, too, became a real problem that season. The desperation was growing. The creepy crawls started extending from the suburbs into Bel Air. Allegedly, the family creepy crawled the home of John and Michelle Phillips, and early that summer they stole an NBC van filled with video equipment. In May, Kitty Ludesinger got pregnant. During the spring, she and Bobby intermittently lived with Dennis Wilson, with her parents in Devonshire, and Gary Hinman. Bobby's former girlfriend, Gail Massman, was also expecting that summer. Bobby was working with Jacobson and Melcher on a film soundtrack. He didn't like the idea of his girlfriend being alone while he was working. Kitty was newly pregnant when Bobby brought her to Spawn the first time. Charlie had issues with her right away. He claimed that she looked like his mother, but perhaps it was deeper than that. Charlie wanted Beausoleil to join the family, and the younger man had been reluctant, sowing his own wild oats. Charlie believed that Bobby was being pulled away from the family by Kitty. He wanted Beausoleil with Leslie Van Houten, and held Bobby's wandering against Leslie as though she were responsible for keeping him, and failed. At her 2016 parole hearing, Leslie said, "He wanted me always to get Bobby to come back, or when Bobby stopped by that I would be with Bobby." Despite his misgivings, Charlie let Bobby and Kitty move to Spawn Ranch on June 1st. On June 3rd, Jacobson and Melcher arrived at Spawn Ranch with a starlet named Sharon or Shara. She is not Sharon Tate, although no further information about her is known. An argument broke out between Melcher, Manson, and Jacobson. Author Ed Saunders claimed that the argument was witnessed by Sunshine Pierce and was over the direction the film would take. Already they'd shot pictures and made tapes for a presentation. The NBC officials, on the one hand, wanted a verite hippie commune movie with a narrator. But Charlie hated hippies. Charlie wanted to make an honest movie presenting the family in an as-is situation, adding marauder elements, bikers, creepy crawly capers, in order to magnet in on potential followers and attract them. Melcher's friend Mike Deasy then showed up. Deasy was a session musician who owned a recording van, which he brought to Spawn Ranch. As arranged by Melcher, the plan was to have the family gathered out of doors, with Manson performing live and Deasy to record them in his mobile studio. Melcher came only because it was his idea to bring Deasy in. Terry clearly had no serious thoughts of taking responsibility for Manson's recording career. Gypsy recalled, "Charlie was very nervous. I think Charlie thought that he was going to be famous. He thought Terry Melcher was the person who might make him a star." Melcher did not stay for the full recording session. He left early after witnessing an altercation between Manson and Randy Starr. Starr was intoxicated, and Charlie assaulted the stuntman. Melcher realized that Charlie's temper was going to make it impossible to work with him, and he left Spawn Ranch, planning to end his association with the musician. Had he known what was about to happen, he probably would have dragged Deasy out of there with him. Before he departed, Terry gave Charlie $50 and told him to buy hay for the horses. The producer saw that the people around Manson were dirty and hungry, and he felt bad for them. But Charlie claimed that Terry was giving them a deposit on future earnings. He told everyone the $50 was Melcher's promise to record them. Mike Deasy had a long and storied music history, performing with some of the best acts in the world. He'd just experienced a career high, playing guitar for Elvis during his 1968 comeback TV special. On June 3rd, he stayed overnight at the ranch, setting up equipment before recording the next day. But things went awry. As he explained, "I had a trailer with a 4-track unit that I was going to use to record the Hopi Indians. Manson and the family lived like a bunch of Indians, so Terry said, 'Why don't you go check it out?' Deasy won't go into detail about his encounter with the family, calling it a descent into hell. I felt this great fear of the evil that was there. Overwhelmed, he overdosed on LSD. I took so much acid I couldn't get down. Here I am, working with Elvis Presley and the Beach Boys. I'm at the height of everything I've dreamed of doing, and all of a sudden I've wrecked it. It all crashed down. While DC was tripping, the cops arrived to arrest Manson for statutory rape with the girl from Reseda. Though she declined to press charges and police weren't sure that a violent sexual assault occurred, the fact that he was an adult and she was a minor made it a crime. Yet somehow, Charlie got out of jail that day on just $25 bond. The terms of his parole dictated that he not be involved with crime and not hang around with criminals. He had been arrested how many times, including the charge for statutory rape? He was definitely associating with criminals, including the straight Satans. His parole officer frequently couldn't find him. He was using narcotics, breaking and entering, auto theft, and other criminal activity, some of which the authorities knew about. He was also harboring underage runaways, and the police knew there were weapons at the ranch, a clear violation of what were federal probation regulations. I mean, Manson served several years in prison for forging a $37 check. Now he's raping, stealing, worse, and no one connected the dots? This author isn't arguing that law enforcement should have realized that a killing spree was about to commence. Hell, nobody in the family at this point knew what was about to go down. But someone should have been asking whether Charlie was on a fast track back to prison, because he clearly was. Manson himself later admitted, "Too much freedom is detrimental to the soul. I should not have been out there. It was too fast for me." He must have suspected that the end of his freedom was likely nigh. Charlie wasn't afraid of going back to prison. What he was scared of was going back without accomplishing what he sought out to do when he was released in March of 1967. He hadn't become famous yet. A few days after DC's visit, Melcher called Charlie and told him that he wasn't the best guy to arrange his recordings. That was it. Some reports show that Charlie was enraged by this rejection. Manson was livid. He approached Sunshine Pierce and asked if he would be interested in a piece of work. Pierce thought it might be robbery and said yes, but what Manson had in mind was murder. He told Pierce that there was one person in particular that he wanted killed, although it might be necessary to kill others as well. He thought he could come up with about $5,000 if Pierce was interested. Pierce was not, and left Spawn Ranch the following day. It seems obvious that Manson had decided to kill either Terry Melcher or Greg Jacobson, or both men. If revenge against Melcher was the motive of the Cielo Drive murders, sending a warning to the producer and former tenant, wouldn't Charlie have gone to Melcher's new house? In fact, he did, but not to murder Terry. He and some of the women went to Melcher's new pad on the beach in July. They didn't enter the property, but did steal something. The point is that we can rule out revenge as the primary motive. If Manson wanted Melcher to know that he narrowly missed being slaughtered, he would have made it more obvious. Charlie wasn't a subtle dude, and Melcher allegedly didn't even connect the crimes that occurred 2 months after he turned Manson down with the musician and his dirty hippie kids until after they were arrested. Vincent Bugliosi and nearly every single person who ever wrote about the Manson family murders fixated on the 5 people killed in Benedict Canyon. Certainly it was the most newsworthy of their killings, but it was not the first. It wasn't about the residents of Cielo Drive. It wasn't about Terry Melcher. And it wasn't really about Helter Skelter, although it plays a significant role. Charlie, mad as he was at Melcher, still had options that June to become a successful singer. He recorded more songs that month at Brian Wilson's home studio. And while Terry was one of the most influential people Manson met, that didn't mean that the doors were closed. If anything, Melcher's failure to follow through was spun by Charlie to his own benefit. He used Terry's so-called treachery to gain sympathy from his followers. He cited the $50 that Melcher gave him, alluding that it was a promissory note that the producer welched on. Charlie's flock was getting pretty sketchy, and a pity party was enough to circle the wagons again. It was easier to blame uber-rich, super-successful Terry Melcher for their woes instead of admitting what was really wrong. In other words, Charlie let them down. Charles Manson failed to provide for them, and Charles Manson failed to live up to his talent and potential. But there was no way in hell that he was going to take the blame for his own failures. Not then or ever.